Big West football was not here for a good time, nor was it here for a particularly long time either. What was seemingly a good idea, designed to provide stability for college football playing schools in California, was derailed by instability over the years. After 3 decades, things ended with 2 Idaho schools and 0 in the state it began in. The reactive nature of the conference, at least on the football side of things, is best illustrated by the midlife crisis name change it experienced. Ahead of the 1988 season, those running the show opted to change its name from the Pacific Coast Athletic Association to the Big West Conference. That was done to better reflect the geographic reality of the conference. After all, Las Vegas, Las Cruces, Logan, they don't really have anything to do with Pacific in any sense of the word. Upon further reflection, those really were the good old days when conferences had the decency to change their name that better reflected the truth. We all know the certain quote-unquote big conferences suffering from severe number delusion I'm talking about. Moving on, folks tend to lament the downfall of the Big East, and make no mistake, it certainly warrants that sentiment. But over on the left coast, the best coast, the Big West downfall doesn't get held in nearly the same reverence. No, I'm not saying they're equals in any sense of the word. However, if it wasn't for Big West football, the college football landscape may look quite different. For many schools over the years, it was the safe harbor they needed to survive, and for a select few, the good ones, it was actually a platform to get them to the Western Athletic Conference. To understand that, we need to go back all the way to the first season of the Pacific Coast Athletic Association in 1969. Nice! Oh, that's not the point. The PCAA was founded at a time when the gaps between the university and college divisions of NCAA football were seemingly widening. In order to receive university division status, which is obviously the top tier, you had to play at least 6 other university division teams in a season. That was an issue for some schools in California because there were obviously the Big Four programs, Cal, Stanford, USC, and UCLA, as well as a small handful of others trying to survive at that level. The problem for those schools doing that, like San Jose State and the University of Pacific, was finding enough university division opponents each year. A new football playing conference at the university division of NCAA football would obviously alleviate that problem, and with that in mind, the PCAA was launched in 1969. Nice. There were 7 schools that joined from the onset. These were San Jose State, UOP, Fresno State, San Diego State, Long Beach State, Cal State Los Angeles, and UC Santa Barbara. On the surface, things made sense. Not only did it give more California schools a presence, a seat at the university division table, but the new conference actually found itself with a bowl tie-in in the form of the Pasadena Bowl, otherwise known as the Junior Rose Bowl. Bowl tie-ins at this point in history, by the way, were worth their weight in gold. The first PCAA season saw San Diego State go undefeated, win the bowl game, and in the year ranked nationally 18th in the country. That side was led by none other than legendary head coach Don Coryell, and Carl Weathers played for the Aztecs. R.I.P. The luster of the new conference quickly wore off after 3 seasons playing. Both Cal State Los Angeles and UC Santa Barbara left. The former opted for life in Division II, more on that in a second, while the Gauchos punted on football entirely due to the high cost involved. The PCAA was dealt another blow when the Pasadena Bowl just stopped organizing, so it meant not only did the conference lose 2 schools, but it also lost its bowl tie-in. These were not great times. Undeterred though, it would carry on as a 5-team conference for 2 seasons before Cal State Fullerton joined in on the fun ahead of 1974. That fun lasted for 2 whole seasons. Then San Diego State, not finding the competition to their liking in the PCAA, decided it was going to go independent. Ironically enough, San Diego State would go on to play all 5 PCAA schools during both their independent seasons. After that, though, they went on to join the Western Athletic Conference. That is a theme you can expect to hear far more in this video. Before we carry on to that, though, there is one thing that needs to be mentioned. During the 1970s, college football undergoes 2 pretty dramatic transformations. In 1973, there is the split of divisions. So you get Division I, Division II, and Division III. The college and university divisions are no more. And then in 1978, they opt for the sub-tiers of Division 1. So you have Division 1 and Division 1 AA. Not wanting to go D1 AA and afraid of being left behind as an independent, Utah State joined the PCAA, breaking up the California monopoly. The Aggies would go on to be co-champions in both 78 and 79, their first 2 years in the league, although it was under some dubious circumstances. In their first season, they had a game against WAC member Wyoming count in the PCAA conference standings because they didn't play Fullerton. After it was all said and done, Utah State and San Jose State would share the conference crown. Those two teams would be co-champions once again in 1979 until something happened. That something being the Spartans having been found guilty of using an illegal player in 7 of their games. They were forced to vacate those results, which included a fairly epic season-opening 48-48 tie against Utah State, and all of those vacated results meant Utah State would be the PCAA champion for 79. It wasn't always pretty, but the PCAA survived the 1970s and things were beginning to look up at the start of the 1980s. The California Bowl, later known as the California Raisin Bowl, great name, terrible snack. Launched in 1981, giving the PCAA champion access to the postseason where they would face off against the MAC champion. UNLV linked up with the conference in 1982. They also put a turd in the proverbial punch bowl early on in that tenure by using ineligible players in both 1983 and 1984. However, they were not punished for this until after the fact. This meant they received the invite to the 1984 California Bowl. Not only does it ruin the conference's record keeping for both of those seasons, but it completely screwed Cal State Fullerton, who went 11-1, but are now 12-0 because their loss to UNLV has since been reversed. The Titans, though, did not get to go bowling that year, and it would have actually been their second consecutive bowl appearance. I doubt this changes anything for Fullerton's long-term outlook at playing college football, but it's still one of those things you always look back on and go, I wonder what would have happened if Fullerton had also reached a bowl game in '84. Moving away from the world of hypotheticals and back to reality, New Mexico State bailed on the odd Missouri Valley Conference setup that was half D1, half D1 AA in favor of the PCAA in 1984. That would give the conference 8 members, its highest total in history, and things were going relatively smoothly for the remainder of the 1980s. In 1988, the conference switched its name from the verbose and unnecessarily formal Pacific Coast Athletic Association to the Big West Conference. You can't help but kind of think those running the Big West were hoping for a little bit of brand confusion with the Big East. And make no mistake, by the way, the Big West is playing football. The Big East won't start playing football for another 3 years after this announcement, but obviously the Big East had been around. Other conferences with big in the name had been around, so it was just one of those things to try and make their conference name sound less like it came out of 1933. On the field, things were fine. Fresno State and San Jose State were the class of the conference, occasionally reaching the top 25 in some years. Off the field, problems started to become evident as the 1990s approached. Firstly, many of the schools in California were facing budgetary issues. Everyone wants to sit out here and shout Title IX, and let me tell you something, Title IX had very little to do with that. That's because most of the Big West football programs in California were already operating at massive losses. Not only that, but these did very little to boost enrollment at the California schools, meaning the value of the football program was usually a net negative. For all the people wanting to blame Title IX, Title IX wasn't the reason why the football programs at the CSU and UC schools were losing tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars annually, so just get over it. Regardless of that, in many ways, 1991 would be the last dance of the Big West, at least in its previous form. Upon the conclusion of that season, Fresno State bolted for the WAC 16 years after San Diego State left and would eventually join that conference. Those trifling individuals at the Western Athletic Conference had once again landed the Big West's or PCAA conference's best program. Issues were compounded even further when Long Beach State dropped football altogether, leaving the Big West with 6 schools. Nevada, which was moving up from D1 AA, opted to join the Big West for the 1992 season, and what do you know if the Wolfpack didn't just go on and win the damn thing? With Fresno State leaving the Big West, it opted to move its bowl tie-in away from the California Bowl, which was played in Fresno. They would move that tie-in over to Las Vegas, which made sense. UNLV was a member of the Big West Conference. You had two Nevada schools there, and quite frankly, there just seemed to be this sense that no one in the Big West wanted anything to do with Fresno after they left. Of course, a similar situation would end up playing out in Las Vegas when UNLV exited the Big West after 1995. They would move their bowl tie-in once more, this time to Boise in the Humanitarian Bowl, or what's today known as the famous Idaho Potatoes Bowl, played in Boise. With two teams in the state of Idaho, that did make sense, but we'll round back to that in a bit. The hits kept coming for the Big West Conference in 1992 when Cal State Fullerton announced that it was dropping football due to budgetary issues. In desperate need of schools to simply remain viable, those running the Big West began vacuuming up whatever independents it could find. In fairness, this wasn't the worst idea in the world. College football was increasingly becoming about bigger conferences, having more teams in your conference. Gobbling up whatever available independent there was, even if it didn't always fit from a geographical perspective, was understandable. So the Big West went east, and in came Louisiana Tech, Southwestern Louisiana, and Arkansas State. There was a fourth team to join. In a very odd full circle moment, Northern Illinois would link up with the Big West. So this was a full circle moment because Northern Illinois had actually participated in the California Bowl in 1983 as a member of the MAC. They even beat Fullerton to boot. A few seasons after that, they decided to leave their home in the MAC for a stint on the Indies, which proved ill-fated. NIU would not be around for very long. They spent a few seasons in the Big West before spending another year on the independent scene as part of a transition that would see them finally go home to the MAC. The Huskies leaving the MAC, an absolutely terrible idea from the start, and one they still regret to this day. It wasn't just Northern Illinois leaving after 1995. Just about everyone else got out of the pool with them. The Ragin' Cajuns also went independent. In fact, they would spend quite a few years out there in the wilderness before the Sun Belt finally launched football and the Southwestern Louisiana, what we know today as Louisiana or Louisiana Lafayette or whatever, one of the many names they've had over the years, joined the Sun Belt Conference in 2001. It was a similar story for the Louisiana Tech Bulldogs, although their independent status, along with Notre Dame being bad but not bad enough, cost them a bowl invitation in 1997. It was sad because that Louisiana Tech team in 97 was really good and should have made it to a bowl if it was not for them choosing to go independent. Anyway, they would join the WAC in 2001. Arkansas State was another school to leave. They went independent as well, but only for a few seasons before linking back up with the Big West in the dying days of this conference. The real worrying thing for the Big West was not even the OGs were sticking around to see how things played out. Pacific dropped football after 1995. UNLV and San Jose State became the latest PCAA Big West programs to jump ship for the WAC. When the dust settled, Utah State and New Mexico State were the only schools remaining from the old PCAA days. Nevada, for their part, also stuck around with the conference, but that was it. They had 3 schools. They were joined ahead of the 1996 campaign by Idaho and Boise State, who were both making the jump from Division I AA. North Texas would link up with them as well. They had spent 95 as an independent, but had also recently made that transition from D1 to 1AA. A 6-team conference was not an issue in 1996, although it wasn't ideal. The Big West could look over to Conference USA and see that as a 6-team conference as well. The issue became Conference USA adding more schools and getting their number up to 7 and 8. Unfortunately, there weren't many moves for the Big West to make as far as available football schools remaining. The only option they really had was to bring back Arkansas State for the 1999 and 2000 seasons. However, that would not be enough. Nevada left the Big West for the WAC after 1999 and 2000 saw the Big West back to 6 programs. The 2000 season for the Big West harkened back to some of those early PCAA days with 6 schools vying for the championship. The term vying is probably a bit generous. Boise State dominated proceedings. They were 5-0 in conference play. No other team in the Big West had a winning record in the year 2000, the final season it would be in existence. Unsurprisingly, the WAC extended the Broncos a conference invite, carrying on a tradition almost as old as the Big West Conference itself, that being members leaving them for the Western Athletic Conference. With 5 football playing members remaining, there weren't really a lot of options available for the Big West apart from just simply dropping the sport. The available schools on the independent scene had dried up, there just wasn't much out there for them to bring in. Beyond that, the Big West Conference had also kept the schools that had dropped football as non-football playing members, with 6 California schools fitting that bill. Not only was there no path available to being a football conference, but you had to take into consideration these non-football playing members who now made up the majority of the conference. Utah State went independent in football while keeping their other sports in the Big West for a few more years. The Sun Belt grabbed North Texas, New Mexico State, and Arkansas State as full members. Idaho joined as a football-only member while keeping their other sports in the Big West for a few years. And that was that. The 2001 college football season came along and there was no more Big West Conference. Of course, the conference did keep the name alive. It's still going strong to this day. That has been done by focusing on its original purpose of being a D1 conference for schools in California, albeit without the football part. Oh yeah, and Hawaii is there now too. Unlike the Big East, the Big West, or the PCAA, was created with football reasons in mind. It was to give more schools in California a chance to access the university division of the NCAA football scene. Yet, it ended up becoming more of a basketball conference even during its heyday of the 1980s. Having UNLV certainly helped in that regard, but the Big West was a conference even in the 70s and 80s that would get 2 or 3 bids fairly regularly. Also, like the Big East, the Big West would end up chasing the football thing over the years, making decisions that were focused on football oftentimes to the detriment of the entire conference. The collapse of Big West football mirrors that of what we saw in the Big East, only on a much smaller scale. From teams leaving after 3 seasons to name change and Northern Illinois randomly showing up, it was a hell of a ride for football, regardless of if you want to call it the Pacific Coast Athletic Association or the Big West. Regardless of name, the only real constant for it over the years was the WAC stealing its top programs. Thank you for watching this video. To learn more about the 1997 Louisiana Tech Bulldogs team that more or less had a bowl invitation snatched away from them by Notre Dame, video lower right hand corner of your screen, and to learn about how George Kliavkoff killed the Pac-12 in 974 days, video upper right hand corner. Until next time, I'm Shine Hollis. This is the Touchback, and as always, hashtag take it out to the 25.